Hi, and welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Carrie Siggins, and I'm so glad you're here today. My guest today is Joel Trammell. He is currently the founder and CEO of American CEO, which is a company that empowers leaders to master one of the most demanding roles in the business, the one of Chief Executive Officer. He has created what he calls the Chief Executive Operating System, CEOS, which is a proven curriculum for developing more effective CEOs, helping them find clarity, confidence, and results for new and established CEOs. During this conversation, we talk about the difficulty of becoming a CEO, what aspiring CEOs need to think about as they are preparing themselves, and in general, what leaders can do to develop teams and build a more powerful culture. Joel has done many things in his life. He's been the CEO of several companies, ranging from technology startups to a public company. He has founded his own company. He has written several books, including the CEO Tightrope and the Manager's Playbook. And he has a new book called The Chief Executive Operating System, which was released in May of this year. I know that you are going to enjoy this episode with Joel. He's pragmatic, he's articulate, and I think he gives you an inside look of what it takes to be a CEO, which is great to know whether you're aspiring to be at the executive level or just trying to figure out what makes CEOs tick. So hang tight and I'll be right back with Joel. Welcome back, everybody. I am here with Joel Trammell. Joel, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Great to be with you.
All right. So I'm super curious. Tell us a little bit about what American CEO is and how it got started.
So, American CEO is my attempt to capture, 30 plus years of experience running various organizations from startup to public companies and trying to give back the knowledge I've learned to help CEOs do a job that's, a very lonely job that there's not a lot of expertise out there. There are not a lot of books on how to be CEO specifically. And so I'm trying to expand that opportunity for people and give everybody a chance to be the best CEO they can be.
So, what kind of services do you provide?
So we CEO training, our kind of standard offerings, a 3-day class that lays out a systematic way to think about the role of the CEO in the modern American company. And then we have services, consulting services around to help implement that system. We also train executive teams and management teams. A lot of times once the CEO goes through the training, they think this is great, but I need my managers and executive team to be on board with what we're talking about here. And so we'll train those folks as well. And we have some software to help CEOs run their organizations using the system as well.
Oh my God. I wish you would have been around when I started on this journey. Oh gosh, 17 years ago, because I had no clue what I was doing. And I think I made the assumption, I think, and I know that you've alluded to this, that people think like it's just a jump, right? It's just the next kind of phase in your career. But it is so different being a CEO. I went from general manager to CEO, and it was a huge leap that I completely underestimated. So, can you share a little bit about your thoughts on, why people have that misconception and why it is such a misconception?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's natural. We start our career, we're hired by some manager who knows more about the job than we do, kind of by definition, right? And every boss we have typically in the organization is somebody who has more experience and is more knowledgeable about their specific area. And that's absolutely true. I mean, a salesperson goes from being a salesperson to being a sales manager, being a sales director, to being a VP of sales, to being the executive vice president of worldwide sales. And in each case, when a problem comes to their desk, it's by definition a sales problem. And they are typically the most experienced, most knowledgeable person in the room. So we just assume the boss knows more than we do about kind of everything. But then when you take that salesperson and you put them in the CEO role, 9 out of the 10 problems that are going to come to their desk aren't going to be sales problems. Somebody's going to want to talk about the new lease in Chicago that we're signing. And you're not going to have any knowledge of that. So the nature of the job changes when you move from an executive role to a CEO role. The executive role is all about having expertise in a functional area. CEO role is all about how you identify and leverage experts and organize experts across a wide spectrum where you can't possibly know all the.
And I think organizations do a really poor job of preparing, right, that next generation for CEOs. I mean, if you think about it, right, the average tenure of a CEO right now in a publicly traded company is 5 years. It's so hard to be successful, and 5 years is just not enough time. And of course, public companies are different than private with the pressure for short term performance that they have. What do you think that companies can do to prepare leadership for taking that level of executive role so that maybe there isn't so much turnover and volatility when a new CEO comes in?
Yeah, so there are several different things that I think would be helpful. One is instead of moving people linearly along a path of expertise, give them much broader experience. Take that salesperson who thinks they want to be a CEO and move them into a product type role where suddenly they don't know all the answers and they have to learn to leverage people in the organization, be a better manager and organizer of people. Structurally also you can set up roles. The military does this very well. They have a commanding officer of every grade, but they also have an executive officer that sits below that commanding officer, and everybody reports through the executive officer. So it's kind of a junior commanding officer in training. They get to see everything the CEO does. The problem in the most modern American companies is there's no one executive who sees more than a small percentage of what the CEO is dealing with on a regular basis. So there's no really training ground for the CEO role. There's only training ground for the individual executive roles.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why being a general manager did help make it a little bit easier is that, even though I didn't have quite the same level of responsibility, it did give me a view of the overall company. But that's not everybody's unique situation. So I agree with that. How do you give people a broader experience and see and test them, right? I mean, that's what you have to do is you have to test people to see do they have what it takes to be able to do this. So what is it that you look for in a CEO? What do you think makes a great CEO?
Yeah, that's a great question. And people are always wondering. And the obvious answer, you'd say you'd want somebody with a bunch of experience to be CEO, but that would not explain the success of people like a Bill Gates or a Mark Zuckerberg who took companies from college, founding them when they were basically in college to worldwide success. So, I think there are a couple of things that are unique about their journey that tell us something about the CEO role. First, obviously, they were very smart. Both of them got a little award at Harvard. You have to be pretty smart to be award at Harvard, but you have to be smart in a certain way. You have to know what you know and know what you don't, and be willing to augment your capabilities with people and processes that make up your weaknesses. So, in Gates's case, he famously had Ballmer, who was the sales guy, because his personality was not the sales personality. He didn't understand that. He understood how to build product. Well, Zuckerberg famously brought on Sheryl Sandberg to be the chief operating officer to turn the crank and do the things that he didn't do well. So having a self-awareness of how you impact others, I think is critically important in the CEO role. Knowing what you do well, knowing what you need help from a people and process perspective to expand the capabilities of the organization. I think also being, kind of knowledgeable about how the product is made, whatever it is, and how and why the customer buys the product are kind of the two key components. People ask me, do you think you could be a good CEO of any company? And I say, no, there are many companies that would not be a fit for my skill set because I don't understand how the customer buys, why the customer buys, or how the product's made. But if you understand those two things, I think you can be a good CEO across a fairly broad range of industries.
Yeah. So I know that you always knew that you wanted to be a CEO, entrepreneur. So I want to get into that story, but I'm really curious about this question. Do you think that CEOs are born or do you think they're made?
No, they're made. There are certainly tendencies again that I think are better tendencies. I think it's better to be a generalist than a specialist is a better tendency to have. Uh, there are behavioral tendencies from a perspective. You don't want to be too far on either spectrum. You wouldn't want a super introvert or a super extrovert. I think either one would be, you want somebody who's very balanced. The ideal CEO would kind of be behaviorally balanced. So we can kind of see both sides of the spectrum. So I think there are certainly certain tendencies that will lead one to want to be a better CEO. Somebody who wants to work through people and gets enjoyment in seeing other people be successful. I think that's a important characteristic of the role. If you're one who wants to do everything yourself, that's not going to be a great fit for the CEO role. But no one, comes out of the womb going to be a great CEO.
My mom said that I was the CEO of our family when I was like 2 years old. So I asked that question because she's like, "You were always like, we have a plan and this is what we're gonna do." So anyway, it's a fun way for her to tease me. All right, but you knew that you wanted to be in leadership from a very young age. So maybe tell us a little about your story, about your journey.
Yeah. So what fascinated me after college, I joined the U.S. military to teach at what they call Naval Nuclear Power School. And of course, the Navy's a large, very bureaucratic organization. And for various reasons, it just didn't operate very well. And that's what really fascinated me. I tell people I wanted to be CEO. I'm not the classic entrepreneur who has a new idea and wants to build a new product or solve some problem that's just a pressing problem I can't go to sleep at night without thinking about. It was more about the organizational challenge of how do you run an organization once it gets to substantial size? How do you run that well? How do you run that efficiently? How do you run that the way that people are engaged, customers are satisfied, and that the shareholders are happy? And that's the problem I've been thinking about probably for the last 30 years.
Yeah. So how did that lead into, the next phase of your career? You started a couple of companies and sold them and now, mentoring CEOs. So maybe share a little bit about that.
So yeah, so at 25, I would have been happy if a Fortune 500 company would have hired me to be their CEO, but they wouldn't. And so the alternative seemed to be start my own. And I even looked at going to business school because I had an engineering degree. And at that time, the business school in the local town wanted me to take 60 hours of undergraduate business before they would allow me into their MBA program. That was before MBA programs got smart and realized people would write them checks if they would take them. And so it seemed like the easiest path was just to start my own business. And then, as you probably know, once you do that, you become a little bit unemployable. I remember I saw the business and wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And I saw a job that I thought I was interested in. And I went to interview and the person doing the job that was not near as qualified to do their job as I was. And they started asking me questions, and I just realized that, it wasn't going to be a fit after having run an organization to go back in at the bottom of another organization. So you kind of become unqualified to do anything else. And so I tell CEOs all the time when they're first time CEOs, you got to understand this job will ruin you because it's really hard to go back after you've been in the CEO role. So you better figure out a way to be successful and make it work.
Yeah, I agree. My husband is the same thing. I came in and, worked my way up through the organization to become CEO. But he's been a serial entrepreneur. And he said the same thing. He's like, when I get done with this, like, what am I going to do? I don't actually even know how to work for another person. And who's going to hire me?
That is correct. Yes, you become a little bit unemployable. So hopefully you do well enough that you don't need the job.
Exactly. Exactly. So, throughout your journey of building these companies, what are some of the lessons that you learned? What are some of the mistakes that you made that were really like those inflection points in your leadership?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, understanding that when you may not have all the answers, you do have to be the leader and you can't uh, be passive about deciding the direction of the organization. Kind of have to set the direction and go. And yeah, you realize there's information becomes available that shows you're headed in the wrong direction, then you have to get your ego out of the way and be willing to change. But you can't be passive. The captain of this ship has to set a clear course and direction. They can't wait for other people to tell them where to go. And that's the tendency, especially I think of young, inexperienced CEOs, is to be very passive, to try to make decisions, collaborative, think that's consensus building is the way to go. And that unfortunately is not the right answer. You've got to set a clear direction and go. It doesn't mean you don't engage everyone in the organization to help you come up with that. But at the ultimate end of the day, you're responsible for setting that clear direction. So that's the first thing I think I tell new CEOs is it's all your responsibility. At the end of the day, if it doesn't go well, it's your fault, no matter what the reason was. And so therefore you ought to be very clear about the direction you set for the organization. I think the second thing that when I graduated with an engineering degree, I thought being smart and being able to solve difficult mathematical problems was a valuable skill. And it does have some value, but much more valuable is the ability to understand people and get people to work well together. And that is a skill that takes a lot of time to develop. I don't think people are naturally born with that skill either. And so, the importance of people, the importance of personality and behavior. I mean, a lot of we start off our training talking about personality differences and behavioral differences. And often that's very eye opening for the students because our natural tendency is to think everybody else is like us, just not quite as good looking and not quite as smart, but they're fundamentally like us. And it turns out they're not. They're different than us in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, I think that was, one of the things that I've really learned through this. And I know that personality styles are definitely different, but I think that because I was such a young CEO, I was CEO when I was 30 and, was given a very big role without a lot of experience, with the founders taking a big risk on me. I thought because I can do it, everybody else can.
Mhm.
And so probably invested too much in people who didn't have what it takes to keep going to that level, maybe not to the CEO level, but certainly to the executive level. Cause I'm like, well, if I did it when I was 28 and then 30, like, why can't everybody else? And that was a huge eye opener for me that the CEO role really, that not everybody can do it. Have you had an experience like that where maybe you overinvested in somebody where you thought, "Well, everybody thinks the way I think," and you could share an example?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a little bit of a strange dichotomy, especially when you're a young CEO, that you're often dealing with senior executives who are much older and much more experienced in their job, but you still have to evaluate their performance and and in some cases let them go because their performance is not cutting the mustard, and it is a little bit of a strange situation, but that's the burden that the CEO faces. Again, you're the one that's ultimately responsible for the outcome of the business. And so you can't afford to have people on board who aren't, getting with the program. And, when we funded one of my companies, we raised $11 million and brought in people, I bring in the first sales exec and he didn't work out. And I bring in the second sales exec and he doesn't work out. Finally, the third guy, he got it to work. And I think I went through 2 or 3 marketing people before I found the right one. But I think, what I was fortunate is I did pull the trigger pretty quickly. Uh, and when I realized they weren't going to work, I moved pretty quickly. I think too many CEOs, because they're insecure about it, they're like, the person's more experienced than I am. Maybe they would be better at my job than I am. Who knows? But that's not their job. Their job's to be the VP of marketing. They're not getting cutting the mustard up there. They're too slow to move and too slow to move on. That's critically important.
You basically described my first, like, 3 or 4 years as a CEO. I did all those things, I felt all those things, and but I believe, like, there's no other way to learn how to be a CEO, but to be a CEO, right? Because you're right, even as you can do everything right to prepare yourself, but there's just nothing like stepping into that position, and you just have to do it and go through those learning curves. Unfortunately, sometimes your employees have to, like, suffer along with you as you go through those, learning curves, and, that's what I look back on, incredibly grateful for all of the opportunities I had to grow and for those mistakes that I made, but I also feel, I feel a little bit, like, sorry for the people who had to, like, sit there and witness it and go for that bumpy ride with me, along the journey. I'm sure there were several people that were like, "What is going on here?" So yeah, I that definitely resonates with me. All right, so let's talk a little bit about executive presence and executive restraint. This is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And you alluded to it earlier, right? That you need to, not be too outgoing or, too introverted or too extroverted. And so what are your thoughts on executive presence and executive restraint in the CEO role? And how do you train CEOs to have those two attributes?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally you get into the concept that, is broadly described as leadership, which we define in our training as the ability to influence others to eagerly follow your direction. What causes people to do that? And that's something that took me years. I mean, there are thousands of books written on leadership, but it still tends for most people to be a very amorphous, hard to define, hard to act on concept. Some people seem to be leaders naturally, but what are they doing to that leadership? And it was really made crystal for me one day. I had a gentleman walk in my office. He had been with the company at that point in time, maybe 2 years. So he thought he was ready to run the place. And so, John walks into my office one day. Can I talk to you? I said, sure. What's up, John? He says, I want to be a leader in your organization. And, of course, what John had in mind was I was going to give him some title, was going to promote him, put him in charge of some team, probably pay him some more money, whatever. And I happen to have a quote from Eisenhower that I love up on the wall that said, leadership's the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because they want to do it. And I showed him that quote. And I said, I can't make you a leader in this organization. And, he was kind of crestfallen. You could see the conversation was not going in the direction he wanted, but he was at least smart enough kid to go, hey, well, how do I do that? And I said, well, let me think. I said, well, there's really kind of three characteristics I've observed that if people exhibit these characteristics consistently in their day-to-day activities, people will follow. I said, the first thing, you got to be credible. People have to believe when you open your mouth that you're saying the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And, he was a kid who maybe had a little bit of a reputation of spouting off in meetings, acting like he knew stuff, saying stuff to make himself look smart. And so he said, oh, you mean I need to think before I speak? And I said, well, yeah, that's probably a pretty good idea. And he said, okay, I think I can do that. I said, what's next? I said, well, you got to be highly competent because we've got a lot of smart people around here that are really good at their jobs. Nobody's going to follow somebody who's not, really solid at their jobs. Now, he was a smart young, engineer. He could do that. He said, okay, yeah, I can work hard. I can be very good at what I do. And then the third one was the one that I think really hit him between the eyes because he never spent much time thinking about it. And I said, for the people you want to lead, they have to believe you care as much about their success as you care about your own success. And that was a thought he had probably never crossed his mind. He had spent his whole time in the organization thinking about how he could get ahead, but he had never spent any time thinking about how what others might need to perform. And so I now call those in the training the three C's of leadership. That if you can exhibit those three, then you can have a significant influence on an organization. If a CEO does not show those, people don't believe that when you say stuff, it's absolutely the truth. You're not spinning it. You're not trying to convince yourself what a great job you're doing when you're not. That you're competent. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be competent, and that you deeply care about the success of the organization and the people in the organization as much as you care about your own personal success. Those characteristics, most people will give you the benefit of the doubt and they'll try to follow you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And how do you think that that translates into employee engagement, right? I mean, so many organizations around the world are struggling with lack of employee engagement. Much of that has to do with management and leadership, if not all of it. What can leaders do to really engage their team? Kind of thinking through how they're showing up as a leader, like you just outlined for us.
Yeah. So Gallup tells us, Gallup has a tremendous amount of data on this, that 70% of employee engagement comes down to the person's direct manager. It's often said people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And so one of the roles of the CEO that is often very much overlooked is the responsibility to build a highly effective management team, not just as the CEO be a good manager, but everybody in the organization that's in a management role is part of managing the critical resource, right? I mean, people in most organizations, if all the people quit and went home, there's nothing left of the organization today. I mean, this is not back to Henry Ford and his assembly line or big capital equipment or pieces of machinery where that was the competitive advantage and people were just irrelevant, right? Most of the businesses we run today, people are the intellectual property of the business. They all walk out, there's nothing left. And so the team that 24 by 7, 365 days a year has to be concerned with their productivity is the management team. And so part of the CEO's responsibility is ensuring that that management team is not just random people selected because they happen to be good performers in their individual contributors role and they keep getting promoted because they're a nice guy and they don't cross any waves or whatever, but people who really are focused on the productivity and success of the employees under their management. And so that's one of the reasons train management teams as well as the CEO is because building out that management team under the CEO is probably the most important work the CEO has to ensure happens.
Yeah, agreed. And, it's such a journey, right? Because we never are fully trained. I'm just,
Oh,
listening to,
absolutely.
right? And so, like, I mean, I think about how much, I believe that the number one job of a leader is to inspire, their employees to do their very best work and, here at Stone Age, live their dreams, right? Not just at work, but how are they fulfilling everything that they want to in their lives outside of work? And how I work so closely with my executive management team and how that trickles down to the rest of the organization. And I think it can be maybe a little bit overwhelming for leaders, especially if you don't necessarily have the right people on your team. But I always tell people it's a journey. Like you're never just going to be there. There's always going to be some new issue that you're going to have to learn how to handle, or they're going to screw up handling a situation, and you're going to have to go fix it. And so I think that idea of the journey is a really important one for everybody to understand as they're learning how to be better leaders and as they're developing better leaders. What's your philosophy on the journey?
Yeah, I mean, continuous improvement's got to be the core of any organization that's dealing with people, and everything changes, and one of the things about teaching CEOs, I'm a lot better teacher than I am a CEO because I'm perfect when I teach it. When I try to execute it, I'm not always near as good at it. But that you're always striving, you can always get better. We're dealing with people who, you spend all your time trying to understand people and still not get there. So there absolutely has to be a continuous improvement mindset in the organization that we're constantly trying to improve our people management, our engagement, our productivity.
Yep. Yep. And how important do you think adaptability is in all of this, right? I mean, I look back at all of the things that we faced as a company. We got hacked right before COVID. The volatility of the economy. How important is adaptability right now in a modern company and being a modern day CEO?
Change is constant. The pace of change appears to all of us to be increasing. Certainly, doesn't seem like that's going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And so obviously, any organization has to be agile in nature. You're not making decisions for 10 years. I just walked out of a meeting where I was helping some people do some strategic planning, and I went back in after being out, and they were talking about what was going to happen in 10 years, and I just had to laugh. I'm like, you don't know what's going to happen next week, but at least we can talk about what we're going to do next week in some meaningful way. I don't, I lose interest when we're talking about what's going to happen in 2035 or what, because I know it's going to be very different than any of us imagined. Um, and so, part of our management system is kind of building an agile system where you train the organization to make turns on a consistent, regular basis. So it's not a big deal when, COVID hits, it's obviously a major disruption, but the fact we're going to go in a different direction, the organization is already conditioned to be able to do that. Too many organizations very set in their ways. When they need to change, it becomes a Herculean effort. I think you need to build an organization that accepts change as a constant part of the business environment.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for those leaders, those CEOs who maybe that doesn't come naturally?
Yeah, that's one area where personality matters, right? If you're too risk averse, uh, you're probably not going to be a great CEO because you're just not going to be able to pull the trigger on things. On the other hand, if you're too risk tolerant, you're the person who has to upset the apple cart just because it's not exciting enough. And so that's another place where kind of a balanced personality, somebody's kind of in the middle who can weigh, the trade-offs of the various risks against each other reasonably well, can hear from both sides and balance that is really important. I've kind of found in my career, the extreme people from a behavioral perspective are often your best individual contributors. And your balanced people are often your best executives and managers.
I'm really curious about your opinion on virtual and hybrid and return to work because I
Sure.
think so many CEOs are grappling with this. Some are demanding people are coming back into the office, some are going completely virtually. We got the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this? And what do you think some of the challenges that we're going to face as we continue to figure out what this whole thing looks like?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but and this is not a problem. I mean, I remember an employee 20 years ago coming to me with this elaborate plan of how they were going to move to some cabin in Montana, and they could do their job just as well from that cabin in Montana as they could do it in Austin, Texas. And they got about halfway into their argument, and I stopped them and said, "You might want to stop here because if you convince me you can do your job from anywhere in the world, I might have someone from anywhere in the world do your job." And there are a lot of people in other parts of the world who are willing to do jobs for a lot less wages than most Americans are. And so, if that were really true, if your job is such that you think you can really do it from anywhere in the world just as well, that's not a very good career to be in. I would advise people to search for a career where they can't do it from anywhere in the world because that's going to go to the lowest bidder over time, right? Or be replaced by automation in some cases. The things you can't do remotely are build trust among the team, or it takes much, much longer to do it. Um, Trust is the key component in an organization that's highly productive. You can build a mediocre organization without trust. You can't build a high performance, highly productive organization without trust among the team. And I don't know how to build that quickly in a remote environment. And so, yes, if we have worked together for 5 years and we have a trusted relationship and you want to move to Alaska, certain situations, maybe that works okay. But in the startup environment, in the team building environment, in the early stages, bringing on new employees, particularly bringing on new employees that have never had a work history. Too. If you're hiring new college grads that don't even know what the work environment is like, bringing those on in a virtual environment, I think, is a recipe for great difficulties and lost productivity.
Yeah.
Obviously, every company's different. There's, again, certain jobs that can be remote, but in broad sense of building a high performing team, it's much, much harder in the remote environment.
We run a hybrid environment here, and I think it works pretty well. But we require people to come in and have team building activities and the collaboration, working together. And I think everybody understands it. It's just doing it in a way that it doesn't feel like it's a mandate, right? Where people still have some like autonomy. I mean, that's what we all want, right? Autonomy over our work. So how do we partner with our employees to be able to make sure that we don't lose that collaboration, that team building, the magic that happens, but allow some flexibility for work from home situations as well. But it's a big experiment that we're running, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over the next 5 years.
It will be interesting. And I think you will see, a wide range of solutions. I
Yeah,
don't think there's one answer. It very much depends on your job and your industry.
yeah, absolutely. All right, I have a few more questions before we wrap up. So the name of this podcast is Reflect Forward. In context of leadership, what does Reflect Forward mean to you?
Well, it reminds me of a phrase we use called manage the future. Um, and so I say that 80% of a CEO, if you're doing the job right, 80% of your time should be trying to anticipate uh, what is likely to happen in the future and make plans to be prepared for that as much as possible. I think most CEOs spend 80% or more of their time dealing with the firefight of the day, or they walk in and, will line up outside their office and they deal with this problem or that problem about something today or what happened yesterday. And the CEO really needs to be in a situation where they're able to spend the vast majority of time. You're always going to have some issues you have to deal with, but vast majority of their time trying to anticipate what's likely to happen, as far out in the future as they can, positioning the organization, making sure you have the right people, the right capital, everything in place to take advantage of what you see developing over the horizon. I use the analogy of the bus driver. You're the bus driver. You want to spend your time looking out the windshield, anticipating where the next curve is, avoiding the next pothole. You don't want to spend your time staring at the rearview mirror dealing with stuff that happened yesterday or the day before.
Yep, agreed. Thank you. So, how about any book recommendations? Like, I know you've written a couple, and maybe you can talk about your books, but for people who just want to generally improve their leadership skills or who think maybe they want to be a CEO someday, or, those of us who currently a CEO, do you have a reading list that you could share?
I have an extensive reading list. We have in the course. The one that I tell people most got me, headed, I think, in the right direction was a book that came out 20 plus years ago called First Break All the Rules, What Great Managers Do Differently. Yeah, from the Gallup organization, Marcus Buckingham was the key proponent of that. And it was the first time as an engineer, I had had a presentation about what people would call the soft skills, the human side, that at least met kind of my analytical brain. Is there really evidence, or is this just somebody making up anecdotes and telling stories that kind of make some sense, but there's no system behind it or no analytical thinking behind it? So that, which of course is now available in the Gallup Q12 survey, is a product and a book that I highly recommend. It's really a playbook for management. And a lot of the things we talk about comes directly from it.
I love that book. It set me on my whole direction. So I'm so glad you said that. I recommend that one as well. Game changing book, and it's still so incredibly relevant, even though it was written 2 decades ago. So I'm glad you shared that. How about your books? Let's talk a little bit about what you've written.
Sure. So the first book I read was called The CEO Tightrope. I was chairman of the Austin Technology Council for several years, and one of the thoughts in Austin was, hey, if we need to get more money, more capital, okay, we can do that. But if we do that, we need more CEOs who are qualified to do something with that capital. And having been a CEO for a time and having done training in my first job with the Navy, I said, well, I'll develop a course. And so I started teaching a course for CEOs, and then that led to writing the book. And what I was really doing with that book was trying to put out kind of for public discussion a systematic way to think about the CEO role. Because when I started and even started the course, I thought I was going to find out that, Stanford had a model for how to be CEO, Harvard had a model, and I would come in as the practical person and say, you academics don't get it. But instead, what I find is really nobody had a model for thinking about the CEO role at scale. There's at least been some stuff done around kind of the startup environment. There's some, kind of literature base around that, but around CEO at scale, once you've got a real business, what does that job look like? Did you think about? So the attempt was kind of to lay out a system, and I hope somebody was going to come along and say, "Oh, that's great, that's good, that's bad." Though you think about this, what about that? Surprisingly to me, it's held up very well, and I think the book still has, there's not much in the book that I would change today. Um, but then I had people come to me and ask follow-on questions. How do I build a management team that aligns with all these principles you talk about in the CEO? So we wrote a book called The Manager Playbook to kind of build a management program for people. And then a lot of CEOs said, okay, well, this system's great. I like it, but it's not very prescriptive. It doesn't say do this, do that. What do I need to do? And the new book, a Chief Executive Operating System that will be launching month, is very much that way, and that it's prescriptive and it gives you a set of tools and forms and things to actually go do that are very tangible as opposed to just broad platitudes about how you need to be a good leader. And so that's what we hope the new book is, that people will really take it and operationalize it into their organizations.
And if somebody was interested in finding those books, do you have a website? Can I send them to easily?
Yeah, sure. The CEO, AmericanCEO.com website. All the books are available on Amazon and all the formats. And the new book will be available here probably the second half of May.
Wonderful. All right. And one final question. If a CEO or an aspiring CEO wanted to grow their skills and the role, what kind of support would you recommend that they seek out?
Good question. I think you need somebody who can give you honest feedback that's independent from the organization that you're running, but has enough visibility to give you the right feedback. That can be a board member in some cases, but sometimes they're conflicted a little bit and their interests are a little different than yours. Can be a former CEO, can be someone, but you need somebody, because when you become CEO, nobody tells you the truth because they can't. There's a filter when you're talking to the boss who ultimately has control of your job. They may, they can try, but there's always this filter, and you're not really getting the absolute truth. And you need somebody that can kind of help you discern what's really going on, where you're doing the right thing, where things are working, where things aren't working. And so I think that's very important for any CEO.
Yeah, great advice. Well, Joel, thank you so much for joining me on the show today and sharing your wisdom and this insight. Super, super interesting. I wish I would have known you 17 years ago. I'm sure could still have a thing or two to learn from you. So it's been really great having you today.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
All right. Hang tight, everybody. I'll be right back. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this podcast interview. Joel was so informative. I wish I would have known him years and years and years ago. Great stuff here. With that, I'm going to leave you for today. I hope that if you like this podcast, that you will write a review, share it with a friend, subscribe to it. It always helps with the algorithms, and it shares great interviews like this. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.